was just then. All right. So today, the introduction will be there's a really odd Islamic polemic that seems to be very common in the Muslim world. And that is that Islam has to be true because it is so unheard of that semi barbarian uneducated, illiterate, semi nomadic types of people might possibly take over an empire. But in reality, this is like one of the most common patterns that there is. It is far more common that barbarians of some sort came in and overtook a country and wiped out the civilization that was there, or just took over the whole thing and became the rulers, than it is for one great empire to be destroyed by another great empire. It is far, there are not a huge number of times that one great empire destroys another, where they were both powerful empires at the time, and they clash, 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 clash until one overtakes the other. That's very, very rare. Instead, what you see is a pattern where somebody small or unexpected comes in and sweeps across, even whenever you have established kingdoms against each other. That's just way more common. And very common is that barbarians overtake and establish kingdoms. So, yes, exactly, Milos. We are going to talk about the Medes and the Mitanni right now. If you will bring up my.
Well, maybe in 30 seconds or a minute, because I did want to say something
Oh, go
about that.
ahead.
It seems to be a very common pattern in Islam where they try to diminish Muhammad, they try to diminish the Arab people, make them look like a bunch of idiots. You should believe in Muhammad because he's incapable of doing anything, and thus it's miraculous that he did something. But when we got to this point in my secular world history class, not 1% critical of Islam. They just said that this is a perfectly ordinary thing, right? That there was an area just outside the organized powers that was kind of neglected, was allowed to develop because the two empires in the vicinity, they didn't think of it as a threat, and thus they're battling each other, weakening each other, and it was just a natural occurrence that an Islamic empire arose. Indeed, one could easily suggest, I don't think Mary's going to suggest this today. Well, she definitely won't today. I don't think she will anywhere in the series, but one could easily suggest that a secular empire developed first and then a religion was tacked onto it to justify it. So for Muslims to give this as some kind of evidence for the truth of Islam is rather silly, totally ignorant of human history in general.
Yep. So I'm going to take a more detailed view of the Middle East. We're going to look at three areas total, I think. I believe that's what I put on here, and only only the Middle East in any like fine grained way, because it's just too exhausting to go through everything. So these are times in the Middle East whenever nomadic or semi-illiterate or less, would be considered barbarians by the ones who got taken over, managed to take over an area. The first one that must have happened was actually before writing was common at all, when writing was just in its bare beginnings of development. So we don't know exactly when it happened. But Kish is very clearly originally a Sumerian city, but by the time it enters history, it has Akkadian rulers and it's speaking the Akkadian language. So it's already been taken over by and these are Semites also. So the Semitic peoples who are barbarians who came in and took it over and became one of the powerful areas of Kish. And Kish established hegemony. Hegemony. It's going to be hard for me to talk today because I've been 24 hours without sleep. Sorry, guys. Hegemony over Sumer for various times during the kind of Nippur period, where if you controlled the city of Nippur, you basically had the kingship for all of Sumer. And Kish had the kingship a number of times. We also have the Gutians, which ended the Akkadian Empire. Notice Akkadian Empire from these guys, all right? Sargon of Akkad from these guys who had been previously illiterates and nomads. These Gudians came in and they were nomadic invaders, and they were so illiterate and incompetent that they were not able to figure out things like maintaining irrigation canals. And so they were quickly overthrown by the next group who could figure these things out, who were the Amorites. And they invaded from the west, another Semitic people. We have no idea what the Gudians were, by the way. The Kassites, who were probably also another Semitic tribe, they came in and they founded the first Sealand dynasty, and then they ruled Mesopotamia as one of the Babylonian dynasties, sort of, but it depends on how you count what Babylon is, right? Then the Mitanni empires, they were the first Indo-Iranians, the first Indo-European horse nomads. So these guys were proper mounted nomadic barbarians who did not have any written language, came in, swept over the Hurrian kingdoms, which were, so you have the Fertile Crescent, right? And just above that was where the Hurrian peoples, they were one of the Caucasian folks, right? Came in, wiped them out, and took them, or wiped out the superstructure, took them over, and became the rulers. The Israelites, of course, were another example. Yes, Moses was educated. He had, he could write and read, and I'm sure there were other people who could read as well, but they were still a nomadic people that were much less developed than the peoples that they took over. Then we have the Phrygians. The Phrygians are most likely Indo-European from Europe, most likely not already in Anatolia. They came across Thrace. They invaded the Hittite Empire into Anatolia. That's the funny thumb that you get, right? Then you have the Sumerians. These are more horse nomads who are like the Scythians, and they're up there way in the plains above the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. They're way up there, and they come around, and they also invade a bunch of places, and they take over different spots, including central Anatolia. We also have the Celts. The Celts made it all the way over there. That's what Galatia was an invasion of these very barbarian Celts who at that time didn't have reading and writing whenever they took over there. The Aramaeans and Chaldeans, they, my timeline's kind of skewed here, but they had previously gone across, and they were the basis of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty. And the Chaldeans settled so firmly there that the place called Chaldea actually changed. It had been in the north, in the northwest, but then it became like at the outlet of the Euphrates and Tigris River. Then you have the Medes. The Medes were so ignorant and barbarian that they never wrote anything down, so we don't know much about them. They're the first of the proper kind of Persian-y people, but we don't really know anything about them because they didn't have a writing system. Even as they were ruling, they ruled without writing. And the Achaemenid, see, again, don't sleep for 24 hours, you can't talk. But anyway, those Persians who are considered the true first proper Persians because they were from Fars, the actual satrapy out there in Iran that is called Persia proper, right? They came in. They also didn't have a written language at that time, but once they got there, they're like, we've got to use some kind of writing to govern this whole thing. Let's use Aramaic. Everybody's speaking that. Aramaic, a language of another group of invaders, folks. So after Alexander the Great swept in, you don't really have this pattern in the ancient Near East anymore very often because virtually everyone was able to read and write anywhere around there at that time. There were very few people who couldn't. There's also the fact that here, back. Let me see if I can.
This is the best advertisement for Islam that's ever existed in the world.
Yeah. Apparently, it is the best advertisement for Islam to exist if we do something that literally tons and tons of people have done before. And I'm not even going to go through all the conquest dynasties that there were in China. So a conquest dynasty in China is considered to be a dynasty that is not a Chinese people group, but instead is from one of the surrounding barbarian peoples who were mostly nomadic folks, like the uh, Xianbei were nomadic confederation, probably, or not entirely sure what they are, but probably Mongolic, possibly. No one's entirely sure what they were, I think. Some, as they may have been different things. But who controlled or took over and ruled parts of what is considered properly China. This is a list of all these different dynasties that were not Chinese and were from invaders who came in at different times. You notice that there are different dates. These are different groups of invaders who came in and took off big chunks of China, and sometimes all of China, and ruled it. For example, the Mongols, who formed the largest empire that has ever existed even to this date, were one of these kingdoms. So the Jurchen were a very major one. They had the Jin dynasty, which was pretty much the only game in town at that time. The Mongol dynasty, which had the Yuan dynasty, and then of course the Manchu dynasty. They're Manchurians, and they were again nomadic barbarians. These folks were not Chinese, and yet in the Xiongnu were Hun. Xiongnu is just like the modern way of pronouncing this character. And the past, it was more like Hanu, but I don't know what the tone was then. I don't know if anybody knows. But anyway, it was the old way of pronouncing it. But all of these people, just look at the numbers of dynasties that weren't Chinese. And you want to tell me that it's like some sort of super special and unique thing that that the uh, that the Arabs were able to take over an area. It really wasn't. It wasn't unique at all. So here is my last
So,
little list. So go ahead.
yeah, well, real quick, we have a comment from OK Mate. How did the Quran know about Mesopotamian gods? It wasn't in the Bible. It shows Quran is miraculous. Well,
What?
I don't know what gods he thinks are in the Quran.
Well, there are a lot of gods, but they're the wrong ones, and they're not Mesopotamian. They're all local. They're all from Yemen. Like all
I
the
also
gods that are listed in the Quran are ones that were worshipped in the Yemen and already in the Hijaz. They they didn't know about the proper names of Mesopotamian gods. That's part of the problem. That's one of the things they got wrong, and we'll get to that eventually, by the way. So thank you for pointing out another flaw of the Quran.
I also don't know how knowing something about the past would be miraculous.
I
The
think
past
that
has happened, therefore it's not miraculous to know knowledge of the past. Just saying.
well, I think that he's thinking that it accurately says what the gods at the time of Noah were, which it doesn't. These are all very recent, much more recent, like in the wrong place in the wrong time, but Muslims are told, hey, look, it has these ancient gods' names. How did they know? Well, actually, it's the wrong gods. Even if you want to say it was ancient Mesopotamia, they're quite recent gods. They don't go back that far.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I did ask him where the Quran supposedly talks about these gods, and he didn't answer me. At least hasn't yet. Milish says all time high score confused comment. I would have to agree with that. And unapologetic apologetic says any type of knowledge is miraculous. Don't you know this, Thaddeus? All right, let's continue on.
all right. So here are times when the semi-nomadic barbarians took over kingdoms in Europe. And we have the Huns, the Vandals. I didn't relist the Mongols. The Mongols also got into what is considered Europe, European Russia stuff, but I didn't relist them. But the Huns, the Vandals, who are also a mixture of Germanic peoples, and the Alans, who are another Indo-Iranian uh, crazy group, and the Vandals. The Vandals, we call people Vandals now for a reason. The Vandals were just complete psychos. Like they killed everyone, including their own siblings and relatives and stuff. Completely psycho. The Visigoths, the Goths, different than the Visigoths. The Franks, There were different tribes of Franks that fought against each other. The Angles and Saxons and Jutes who came in, they're all different peoples, but the invasion happened at the same time. The invasion of Scotland from the Gaelic, Scotland and England from Ireland, the Irish invaded, and they're the last people in the world you would imagine would invade any place successfully, because back then the Irish were so behind everyone else, it wasn't even funny. The Norse, of course, were very successful uh, raiders and conquerors. They actually established their own kingdom in southern Italy. A lot of people don't know that, as well as taking over Normandy, which is still named after them to this day. The Hungarians were fairly recent invaders to what's now called Hungary. Magyars is more of their own self name. And then, of course, the Golden Horde. If you ever hear of hordes of people, or hordes of this, or hordes of that, it actually comes from the transliteration of their name for themselves in Turkic. Horde is just a transliteration. So anytime you talk about a horde, you're talking about the Golden Horde. Anytime you're talking about Vandals, it traces back to those Vandals there. So these were very influential folks. Tamerlane, of course, was another example of a conqueror. I listed him alone because people recognize his name rather than his group's name. So this is an incredibly common pattern in history that that these unsettled people are able to knock down, take over, knock out very powerful groups of people. These people over here, the first list there took out the Roman Empire in the West, completely destroyed it, guys. Like, done. So, that is so unexpected from how incredibly powerful the Western Roman Empire was. I can just the astonishment of people when this actually happened was overwhelming to the people who lived at that time. They thought it was the end of the world because no one could imagine that anything like this could happen. So, in the light of history, there's nothing exceptional about the takeover of or the expansion of the Arab polity coming out of the Hijaz. It's less exceptional than Alexander the Great, for instance. So I just needed to start out by kind of busting that little myth at the beginning, because it's something like I had actually heard people talk about this, a bunch of people, but it's just something that's so ridiculous that I just haven't taken it seriously. But there are so many people who come from Islamic countries who take it so seriously that I felt I had to address it. And yes, the Sea Peoples are another really great example of people who took over stuff, but it's the Philistines are the ones who really made a lasting impression. Most of the rest didn't last. And since they were sea-based without too much land empires, they kind of fell below my threshold of including. But you can continue to think of other peoples who kind of fit this bill too, because it is so incredibly common. And in fact, until the machine gun, the invention of the machine gun was what finally made nomadic horse barbarians no longer a threat to civilization. Until that moment, a nomadic horse barbarian group could take over a civilization just ridiculously easily if they stopped fighting with each other for like 5 seconds, which they usually didn't. And that's really what saves civilization, is that barbarians, it's very hard to get them to cooperate a lot of times. And Muhammad, just like when the Genghis Khan was very good at getting everyone together and to cooperate, and so he was incredibly successful. Muhammad was successful in that same way.
So Chris says the lack of any support of Islam is astounding. I couldn't remain a Muslim if I knew how bad it was. And I think that, even though you're saying that you didn't even treat this argument seriously, I would say it's probably actually about the best argument they have from a legitimate. That isn't a lie, that isn't totally made up. The spread of Islam, while certainly not miraculous, is at least some kind of evidence that it could have been backed by God. Whereas all the other things they generally say are just flat out lies. So I still think it's possibly the best evidence they have, even if it's not even good enough to take seriously. So there you go.
Yeah, and then my last example, because they want to put, well, maybe it has to be a religious group or something. I just had to throw in Vedic India as one last example, because of course the entire idea of Hinduism hinges on this idea that these barbarians came in and destroyed and took over and mastered the settled civilized people who were there. Um, these barbarians who only had oral poetry and oral uh, religious texts that they kept only in their memories for many, many hundreds of years after taking over. So that was my last example because that amused me so much. So if
Very good introduction there, and I'm sure that all of the Muslims are proud of that.
And we're proud of that.